Welcome to the Section 111 podcast with your host, TJ Shoemaker.
And welcome to episode 3 of the Section 111 podcast. I'm your host, TJ Shoemaker, and I'm joined today by two-time BCS national champion and former University of Florida tight end, Tate Casey. Tate, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, TJ. I appreciate you having me on, man.
Oh, no problem. Tate, we're just going to kind of jump right into it. And I'm a Florida fan, so I'm going to kind of be a little selfish right now and ask you about the jump pass. And I'm sure you've gone over that a lot through the years. I mean, it's been 13 years since it happened, so I'm sure you at this point you might be a little sick of it. But like I said, I'm going to be a little bit selfish right now.
Not at all, man. I'm all for it. Let's go.
All right, let's do it. All right, so what was going through your mind when the call came in and as the ball was kind of in the air during the play?
I think as the call came in, we kind of expected at some point in a big game, for a few weeks that was possibly going to come up. And, we had repped it so much in practice, and I get a kick out of talking about it and how much we prepared for that play pretty much against every different goal line defense you could face. And repped it after practice, Mullen and Tebow and myself, just repping at certain looks and trying to make sure that we had it in the playbook when we needed it. It was guaranteed. And so when it came in, it wasn't necessarily a shock. Just given the situation and given the, the time of the game and the game that it was, obviously LSU was a big game for us that year. And, I think from that side of things, it was expected. We were ready for it. We knew it was going to work. From a standpoint of the look that we got being one that we didn't see or rep against, it definitely made it a little bit more challenging. And obviously the play kind of shows that with the double clutch and the back pedal and adjusting to the ball.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing running through my mind in a situation like that, one was don't drop it. Because that thing, we always talk about how long a ball hangs up in the air on a regular pass play, on a deep ball or anything else. But when you're talking about one right in the breadbasket that hangs up that high, man, it feels like it's 3 hours.
Yeah, man, that's what I was going to say. I mean, just watching the play, Tebow definitely heaved that one up there pretty high, and it did feel like an eternity before it came down.
Well, I think the biggest thing is, too, is just if you hear, as a player, you kind of go blank in situations like that, and you don't really hear much. Still you're just thinking in your own head, and you've got, inner monologue. And I think the one thing I remember is the stadium just kind of had that dead silence, and then and then it happens. And when it did, the place just erupted, and it was definitely a cool moment as a player to have that, have that feeling of such a moment or a key moment in a big time game. And that was really the cool part about it.
Yeah, for sure. I remember I was just an 11 or 12-year-old kid. I was at my grandparents' house, and that was kind of really maybe the first or second year that I really started watching college football. And I kind of just randomly picked Florida as the team that I wanted to follow. I had watched them the year before and kind of just stuck with them and followed them after that. And I remember watching that LSU game particularly on my grandparents' couch. And when that play happened, man, it was crazy. I wish I would have been at the Swamp, but just know that I was going crazy at my grandparents' house.
Definitely a good moment for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So that's not your only good moment. That's obviously a legendary play, and that's historic, and that's going to go down in college football history. But you were more than just that play. I mean, you were a great run blocker, a team guy. You were good in the locker room. One play that really sticks out in my mind is the play in 2008 against Georgia. You were kind of lined up at H-back in the backfield, and Tebow option to the left with Percy in the backfield as well. The safety and linebacker came up. You took the safety, and the linebacker had to kind of make the decision as to take Tebow or take Percy. Well, he picked Tebow, and Tebow just dished it off to Percy, and Percy ran it in the rest of the way. And I mean, I've gone back and watched that play several times, just seeing where everybody's lined up. And on that play, you really stick out and really spring Percy on that play.
Yeah, we had I think the really cool thing about the position when I was at Florida, and really it's different from being a traditional tight end where you're on the ball 90% of the time, is being able to have the flexibility to move out in the slot, bump into that H-back role, sometimes being out wide. What that does is just gives you the ability as an offensive coordinator, as a head coach, to utilize, your checkers wherever you can fit them, and give a defense multiple looks to kind of keep them on their toes. And that's one thing we were able to do. I really obviously appreciate you recognizing a play like that, because those are the kind of plays that in my mind really are the athletic plays. The ones that you have to be athletic, open space blocks that, there's nobody within 10 yards of you and a safety, and you've got one place you have to keep him from getting to. And those are the ones that, when you're up against a guy who's maybe 6'2", 205, 210 pounds, and a 4'4", 4'5", 40, that's hard to make, when you're 6'7", 240, 250. So I definitely enjoyed having those. I mean, I will say that blocking for Percy and blocking for Jeff Demps and Chris Rainey and even Keyston Moore and Moody, they were easier blocks than if you had a big tank in the backfield. But that being said, it's easy to get off balance with an open space with faster guys. So having those plays that we ran a lot of on the options and those, outside run game. I mean, it's just cool to have those positions where you have tight ends that can move like that. And I know Billy Latsko, myself, and Aaron Hernandez, and a lot of guys that played that position over the 5-6 years that Urban was there. They definitely hold themselves to a certain pride and a certain standard at the position. So that was the cool part about it. But yeah, I appreciate you saying it.
Oh, no problem. Yeah. You kind of played that on that play, particularly you were kind of in that Billy Latsko role. You'd seen him do that hundreds of times, and it was really cool to see you kind of take over that role and be able to finish a play like that. Perfect execution. So props to you, my man.
I appreciate that.
All right. So I wanted to get your opinion on your favorite moment as a player at the University of Florida.
Man, that's a tough one.
Yeah, a lot of good ones. So,
it's funny. I've got a lot of good ones, even from bad years. I mean, from freshman year under Zook, a lot of great moments there as more of a true tight end and catching a lot more balls or being more involved in the pass game to, being more of a blocking, utilized tight end or slot receiver, H-back. I think a lot of my favorite moments stem from team moments. A lot of them off the field. It's funny is the team chemistry that we had in 04 isn't the same as it was in 05, and 05 wasn't the same as it was in 06. As that locker room evolved and you kind of watched it happen right in front of you, I think some of the cool moments that I had were off the field, just seeing us grow as a team in the off season, with Nick Marotti, and then obviously championship games and championship moments. In 06, I had a lot of really cool memories from a season standpoint, but, championship game, being able to really put the lid on the game in the fourth quarter with the reverse pass from Tebow to Bubba Caldwell to myself was one of those a really cool moment, because I think everybody, if you get in this league, you grow up looking to win an SEC championship.
Right.
And, I think every kid that has the aspirations of being a college or a professional athlete always dreams about scoring that touchdown or scoring in one of those, primetime big games that have a huge impact on, the season. And that was one of them for me in 06, which was great. And it was a little bit watered down going into the championship game just because of ankle injury and bowl practice. And so I didn't really get to finish that season off the way I wanted to. But good news is that I got a chance to come back on a medical red shirt in 08, which, I would have graduated in 07 if it wasn't for that. So
yeah,
very fortunate to come back in 08 and be a part of that team, which I can honestly say both of those years we knew exactly what we had in the locker room as long as we went out and took care of our business. And, the plan to win and the game plan and everything was there. The coaching was there. And, of course, the talent, as everybody saw, was there. So there's a lot of really cool moments. And I think the biggest thing was just the celebrations and the celebrations and the camaraderie and that locker room, those 2 years and over the years were just awesome. All of them, some really good memories.
Yeah, I'm sure. So now I kind of want to get your most heartbreaking moment as a player.
Ugh. For me, really two, and they both surround injury. I think going down in bowl practice with torn ligaments in '06 before the championship game was probably, I'd say, the first time in my whole life that I wasn't participating, whether it be high school, junior high, all the way down to Pop Warner, where I had been hurt and couldn't play. And so I think for me, the rehab and the 3 to 4 weeks of getting ready to try and at least play a little bit in that game, which I saw limited action, but I didn't walk until technically the day before the game when I got the cast off, and I don't think we ran until pregame when me and Mick Marotti, and he made that determination or that call to the athletic training staff. So very fortunate enough to really put a lot of grind into the rehab process and was able to at least play a little bit, even though it was limited. But it was probably still one of the down moments because you never know you're going to make it back to that game. And so for me, the question was, as great of a game as that was, I'm so glad that we showed up and did what we did. I didn't know whether I'd ever make it back to a national championship game. And so thinking that I was graduating the next year, it was a little bit concerning. It was a little bit of a downtime. But to come back and, 07, kind of repeat with the elbow injury and having surgery in December, and then turn around and having surgery in the spring, and then come back and finally, won a medical appeal to the NCAA and realized I was going to be back around in '08. There was a damper in '07. That was the first season I never played football since I was, fourth grade. So for me, it was probably the lowest of the lows, I'd say. Aside from not being able to play baseball after freshman year.
Okay, yeah. I saw that you were on the baseball team. Did you kind of just shift your focus to football, or how did that kind of come about?
I think it was a little bit of that. I don't know if I'd necessarily say I'd shifted the focus. I think the hardest part was having a new head coach come in who didn't necessarily or wasn't necessarily known for utilizing a tight end offense. And being the starting tight end at the time as a freshman, I think I was kind of in a position where I really had to sit back and take a look at priorities and my future and where that lied. And being on football scholarship is not the easiest thing to convince an incoming head coach that, hey, I want to play baseball as well.
Right.
That was something that was more of an understanding between me and Zook before I even, signed my scholarship that, hey, baseball's in the picture. And that was agreed upon both parties. I'm coming to Florida to play football and baseball. But Urban had his mind set that, hey, you're just tight end, and if you want to keep your job, we need you on the football field. And so, would I do it the same if I had it back? I don't know. It's a hard question. It's even harder to think about because I know how good I was on the baseball field and felt that I could compete at that level. So it's kind of a hard question to go back and answer now. But I think about it, quite a bit. I'm sure there's plenty of two-sport athletes that think about it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Especially, Kyler Murray just turning down all that MLB money to go play in the NFL.
There's some guaranteed money in baseball.
I know.
Sure.
That dude's crazy. That's all I can say.
Yeah. But, there's guys that did it. Gavin Dickey was on the team when I was a freshman, sophomore, and Gavin was just in a different role, in football. Gavin was a great baseball player, he's a great football talent, great athlete, but it wasn't like Gavin was fighting to keep the starting job on the football team either. And I think that's where there's certain differences of certain two-sport athletes that you can look at that maybe they don't mesh as well in one sport as they do with the other. And being a tight end on the football field and also trying to have the length of a pitcher and not get too bulky, and be able to be fluid on the mound is a hard thing to do. Football wants you at 260, and baseball wants you long and stretched out.
Right.
It's a little bit hard thing to accomplish.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm glad you chose football because I don't know if we'd be sitting here talking if you didn't.
Oh, well, I was always going to play. I wouldn't have given up football. So, like I said, it came down to an ultimatum. I mean, I know where I would have had to go.
Okay, cool. So, did you have any like pregame rituals? Maybe like a favorite meal or like a superstition or anything like that?
I ironed.
Yeah.
I had a routine. I had a routine night before games. I had a kind of a set routine. I always ironed my dress shirt, my outfit for the next day. Made sure everything, my tie was pressed, and try to do my best to have some form of ritual, just to keep my mind at ease, not think too much about the preparation that goes into a football game. Really, Tuesday through Saturday is so strenuous that I think at times you got to find something that keeps you a little bit, a sense of normalcy. And that was one thing I did. Talk to family, hang out with the guys on Friday night, get up on Saturday, and kind of get your mind right from the get go. But as far as any superstitions or rituals, I can promise you, I washed all my laundry. I wasn't wearing dirty jock, that's for sure. I did have a wristband ritual. Kind of my brother was a college football player, was kind of one of my biggest supporters, my whole life, and so I always had his initials and his number on my wrist tape. Small stuff like that, nothing crazy. But I had my certain things that I would make sure and stick to.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, so kind of moving forward a little more. As you mentioned earlier, you were working under Mickey Marotti, the strength coach at Florida at the time. Just kind of touch on his personality and what he was like.
Dude, love him. Still love him. Love keeping up with what he's doing at Ohio State. I think that they got the best. Obviously picked up one of the best coaches in the country when they picked up Urban, but they also got the package deal picking up Mick Marotti. Coach Mick is probably the best in the business. I would say he's hands down the best in the business.
Yeah, I think so too.
And not only that, he's a great personality. I mean, he's a good guy. He's a faithful husband. He's a great father. And he builds men the way they're supposed to be. On and off the field, he does a great job of mentoring players. And I think that the one thing about Mick that if you just take football and strength and conditioning aside, he gets everything out of you. And he does it in a way where, when you're 18 to 22 years old, you can relate. So that's a kudos to him because he's still doing it and he's still doing it the right way. But yeah, he's definitely the best in the business.
Yeah. And I mean, he's not making $735,000 for nothing. I mean, he's definitely good at what he does. And I
can tell you that one of his proteges is catching up to him as being one of the best in the business because Nick Savage isn't far behind. As much as we talk about Coach Mullen and the coaching staff we brought in, Nick Savage is one of those guys that was under Mick Marotti at Ohio State. He's definitely got that Mick Marotti gene to him, and he's going to do great things at Florida. He already has, shown some of that.
Yeah, definitely. You actually read my mind. That's where I was going to go next was Nick Savage, the current strength and conditioning coach at Florida. Like you said, he was under Mick Marotti for the 2013 season, I believe, as an intern. I mean, he's learned from the best, and right now you're seeing the results in the players at Florida right now. I mean, just the players that post their body transformations just from spring to now, it's crazy how much bigger and stronger these guys are, largely due to Nick Savage's
his approach.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, just his approach. I agree, and somebody who's seen, going from Zook to Urban, and seeing Mick Marotti come in with Matt Balis, and you've got to give props also to Matt Balis, who's also another one of the best in the business right now up at Notre Dame. Matt Balis was one of the driving forces between him and Nick that first off season. I think that Urban had a goal of changing the culture completely, especially from a discipline aspect on the field, in the weight room, in the classroom. And, Mick and Matt, they implemented that to a point to where you almost got sick and tired of hearing it up until probably after that first year in 2005. And then we got the other class of recruits that would come in, and you started seeing the leadership take over. And kind of that first off season was miserable. I mean, guys, we never worked that hard. And it was hard. I mean, it was to the point where you'd question life a couple times. But I tell you, going into the second off season, under that crew, the older guys had an expectation and a standard that was set. And so the bar had been raised, and we, demanded that everybody live up to that expectation. I think that's what you're going to see at Florida, under Savage, especially what's going on right now in year 2. Those guys that have been there for, last year, the guys coming in and the younger guys, they're going to demand everybody, bring it up a notch. And so I think you'll see that on the field, and obviously dying to see the results, because the strength and conditioning program shows, especially in those big time games when you need to close.
Right. I mean, you saw it last year against LSU late in the game, able to overcome some adversity and pull the game out.
Absolutely, and I think that's what it does for you. From a mental toughness aspect, it does so much for you to have a strength and conditioning program that gets that and understands what it takes.
Right. So, just talk about some of the hardest workouts that you've been a part of under Mick Marotti, and any stories maybe associated with them.
I mean, there's not a guy in 05, 06, 07, or 08 who did not see every piece of machinery in that weight room. I mean, there's been, I would say, we used to have the St. Valentine's Day Massacre lift, and that was probably one of, if not the toughest workout of the year. I mean, we had a couple like that. We had the midnight lift, a couple of different early morning, like 4:30 a.m. lifts that were just, brutal. But man, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre lift was one of those that was, you almost couldn't walk out of the weight room, and they chain the doors, once you're in there, they chain the doors, and I mean, everything's to failure. So you're on, leg press, and, you're putting up what you had achieved your max leading up to that workout, and you put, 600 something, 700 something pounds on the leg press, and you do it, your goal was 50 reps. And there was, guys that would hit up to 30, 35 and almost pass out trying, and they'd strip a plate on each side, and then you'd keep doing it till failure, and they'd strip a plate, and by the end of it, you got nothing on the bar, and your legs are about to give out on you, and you're still trying to get as many as you can. And you're done with it. And then you go to the wall sit, and your legs are gone, and you can't breathe, and your mind's running 1,000 miles an hour on what you'd be doing if you'd have stayed back home. So where would I be? What would I have done after high school if I would have came here? But when I talk about mental toughness, though, that's the reason for it. And those workouts were the reason we accomplished what we accomplished. So looking back at it now, man, I mean, could you imagine if you go through all of that and don't win anything? And that's what I always tell young guys and tell guys in college. Could you imagine doing everything you do on a daily basis and walking out of a 4-year degree playing football at high-profile school and not winning anything? It's almost tragic.
Yeah, man, I can't imagine that. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you that I definitely wouldn't have survived a Mick Marotti workout.
Well, like I said, Mick pulls it out of you. I mean, that's a trait of a great strength and conditioning coach, isn't just a bunch of screaming and yelling and getting guys going. I think the biggest thing is you got to find something in every single athlete to pull it out of them. And once you do that and you realize exactly who's who and what's what, you can get them to do anything. And I think that was really the point. We had a lot of talent. We had a lot of, attitude. We had a lot of discipline stuff at first. And I think once that everybody realized that they could do more than what they thought they could, it obviously led to 2 championships.
Right. And I mean, when I think about, the combination of talent and leadership, I go back to obviously the championship seasons, but kind of more so the 08 season, just because, I mean, you had yourself, you had Tebow, you had Spikes, you had all those guys that had control of that locker room, and it wasn't just the coaches, but it was mainly due to, probably Mick Marotti playing a role in that and showing you guys the way as players, and then you guys kind of created that standard.
Yeah, but I think that was one of the biggest talks. The biggest talk was setting that Gator standard back where it needs to be. And that was something we had lost over the years, especially at home. Winning in the Swamp, I think one of Urban's biggest priorities was bringing the Swamp back to what it was. making it a place that nobody wants to come into, and making it a place you never lose games. And if you can achieve that, then it's half the battle, and then you go, win some games on the road, you're right in the driver's seat for the East. So that's definitely something that was a high conversation point for that staff coming in and making sure that right off the bat, that Gator standard, here's what it is, here's what we expect. If you don't want to be a part of it, go somewhere else, and we'll give you the pass. There's the door right there. And so I think setting that tone early was a big factor in us being a successful sport.
Yeah, definitely. So how much do you think Mickey Marotti contributed to Urban's success both at Florida and at Ohio State?
Oh, I'd say an insurmountable amount. I mean, I'm sure, and this is just a guess, this to be me, assuming, but I would imagine that Urban would give high praise to Nick Marotti for having a lot to do with the success of his teams. And only because I say they probably talk every day, 5 to 10 times a day from a coach standpoint on who's doing what, who's showing out in the weight room, who's the guys that are coming up, who are the ones we're losing in terms of player-coach relationship, et cetera. There's a lot that goes on behind those scenes, and I think that I would imagine you'd have to look at Urban Meyer's teams and say that you can't take away anything from Mickey Marotti being a part of those, because everywhere Urban's gone and won, Mickey Marotti's been right there behind him.
Exactly.
And that's also not to take away from Urban's coaching ability either. Who's to say that if you had a podunk strength coach that could just build muscle on guys, they wouldn't have done the same thing. So it's hard to say.
So obviously you were already on campus when Urban and Mickey Marotti arrived, but what did you see being a player as far as Marotti's role with recruiting, and did he kind of have his hand in that at all?
I think from a standpoint of, he was definitely part of that support staff. I think that as far as guys coming in and showing the weight room, and the facilities were changing, we just tried to get this whole weight room turned over to finally catch up with the rest of the conference in terms of recruiting and facilities, and there was some stuff going on to aid that, build out the new weight room, et cetera. I think that definitely helped. And then I think having a high character guy like Mick Marotti, when parents ask, what his plan was for their kid to be successful, he obviously has a huge role in that. And being that he wants to do it the right way, from a nutritional standpoint, from a weight room standpoint, to making sure guys are on time in class, making sure they're on time to meetings. He's involved in every step of that, whether it's in recruiting, whether it's in everyday athletic life. He's definitely right there. So, like I said, you got to give props to Nick. He's definitely a hell of a coach. He's one of those guys that's still the best to do it.
Definitely the best in the business, in my opinion. And like I said earlier, he's making $735,000, and rightfully so. My next question for you is, how does Nick Savage kind of compare to him, and do you kind of see Nick Savage becoming the next Mickey Marotti per se?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to discredit Nick and say he'd become the next Mick Marotti. I think that obviously he's got his own style. It is very similar in terms of the intensity, in terms of the high energy. I love what he brings, and I love having conversations with him about who's doing what. The chances I've had to talk to him, he's a square jaw, bow chest guy, and I think that's what you want in a strength coach. Is not only that, he's somebody who talks in levels with his players. He's not just somebody that's a talking head or screaming, shouting, and barking orders. He's one of those guys that definitely has a relationship with his players, and that's one of those things for a strength coach. It's really rare. A lot of strength coaches think their job is just to build muscle and put those guys on the field in the best shape possible. I think what's bigger with guys like Mick Marotti and Matt Bayless and Nick Savage is just the ability to have that relationship level with a player and get the most out of him as a person. You know what I mean? When you mentor players,
right.
It's more than just strength and conditioning. I think he will be eventually on the same, best to ever do it level. He's a young guy. He's got a fiery intensity. He's always, on his toes. He's always getting his guys up. And I think for a strength coach, that's what you look for one of those guys to make a huge impact in a player's life. And I know those players, as they walk away from college and go on to better things, whether it's NFL, whether it's a professional career, those are the kind of things that build some great young men. And I know Mick Marotti's got a laundry list of those kind of guys, and I'm sure Nick Savage will, as he gets older and as he, develops into his career even more.
Right. And like you said earlier, it's more than just lifting weights. I think the last relatively good strength coach that Florida had was, I guess you could maybe say, Jeff Dillman, and he was kind of just that. I mean, that dude was just the yelling weightlifting type of dude, and it worked for a year. I mean, you saw that in 2012. They were under Muschamp. They were finishing some games, but then the next year, I mean, you saw them just get beat in the trenches and didn't have the mentality that the Marotti players and the guys under Urban had.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to laugh at that in a negative light. I just
no, you're good, man.
I think that a lot of that carryover was from former recruiting classes and just some really, really good talent. That kind of 2012 was a pretty substantial year. I think the East was kind of in that downfall period that began a 4-year stretch of pretty not bad football, but not necessarily up to what it was in the East.
Right.
And I would agree with you, but I'd say we hadn't had a strength coach like that since Mick left, to be quite honest with you. And I'd never want to take away from anybody's career, and I definitely wouldn't say that about Dylan. He's a strength coach. He's a good strength coach. I don't know if I'd put him anywhere near Mick Marotti's class.
Right, he's just not on that level.
I can't say I wouldn't put Nick up there near Mick Marotti, because I think he's on that level pretty soon, if not right now.
Right, and now I will say that Mike Kent definitely wasn't the answer at Florida, and we saw that under the McElwain regime, if you want to call it that.
I'll plead the fifth.
All right. So let's we'll kind of wrap it up. We'll do our Q&A segment, and then I'll let you go.
All right, man.
All right. So Sean Scott wants to know, what was the transition like when Urban took over, and what were the biggest changes that you witnessed with the new staff?
I think for me, and I would say mostly the team, like majority of the team that weren't upperclassmen, I think that the biggest thing was the emphasis on academics changed. I think the emphasis on making tutoring sessions and mandatory tutoring sessions if guys were having trouble in the classroom, or making, for freshmen, sophomores, mandatory tutors until you had a certain GPA over 3.0. Those kind of things were some of the small things. And then obviously we touched on the strength and conditioning program side of things. It was just a whole new ball game, for us, mat drills and, on Wednesday mornings, mat drills at 5 a.m., having guys there at 4:30, small stuff like that I think most guys adapted, as quickly as we could. And we started to see what it did and how it changed the program. And, some guys left, but I think what it did was it weeded out the guys who didn't want to put the work in. And so the guys that stuck around, I mean, obviously we saw what it did.
Yeah. I mean, you've got some hardware to prove it, don't you?
Yeah.
All right. So the next one, Zane Long, it's kind of a two-part question. So the first part is, he says, obviously Urban Meyer is known for his intensity. Do you have any stories about his intensity?
About him taking it out on me personally or in general?
Hey, either one.
I think I've got some good Urban intensity stories, some of which are just the typical, maybe a play in a game or something that just drove him insane. But I think that the biggest thing was special teams. Urban's always had a huge emphasis on special teams. It's one of those things that I really appreciate out of Dan Mullen and his staff, because I think that is one of the most overlooked things in college football when it comes to teams that want to be great versus teams that are just, good teams. I'll never devalue special teams meeting room. Between Urban and Steve Adazio and some of the coaching staff that we had on special teams, Urban always had he just had a hell of an edge to him about special teams. And when you go back and look at those years, especially in 06 and 08 and those championship years, it was a huge reason we were so good. And there's a huge reason we won big time games, and I'm sure if you go back and look at field position and special teams impact on that, there were times where block kicks won us games. And Jarvis Moss, a perfect example, be 2006. We blocked
cock block.
Yeah, three kicks in a game, and Jarvis Moss gets his hands on the last second kick to keep us in the running for a national championship. And most people would look at that and say, man, he's just an animal. He's 6'6", and he's just got this huge vertical. He's a big guy. But as players sitting on the sideline before that snap, we've seen Jarvis Moss block 6-7 kicks in practice that week on a play that was designed specifically for that. And so to us,
Right.
It was no doubt in our mind that he could get a hand on it and we could win this game. And when it happened, I think that those are like the small moments that you appreciate out of the work that you put into it. When you go back to, fundamental football and technique, and you rep and practice. And those are the moments that you really, rely on in huge moments in a game. And I think a lot of the guys on the team in 06 and 08 could sit there and tell you honestly that there was never a moment you were out of a game. When you bring everything together, the mental toughness, the repetition, and just the overall hard work we put into, the off season had a hell of a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and that's an element that was kind of missing from Florida for the past 10 years is special teams and the lack of emphasis of it. And, man, I can't tell you how happy I was when Mullen took over, and I'm pretty sure it was like the first spring practice. They're out there practicing blocking kicks and blocking punts. Man, that was beautiful to see.
And there's an art to it. I think, some coaches understand that. There is an art to blocking a kick. There's an art to blocking a punt without a penalty. I mean, there's an art to, taking the ball off the foot. There's an art to, low shoulder and coming off the edge, outside shoulder force and keeping everything inside of you on a kickoff, staying in your lane, small stuff like that. But that's stuff that we rep, 45 minutes in a practice sometimes. And some coaches would say, well, hell, I can't spend 45 minutes on it because it's not that important. Well, those are the same coaches that are losing games in the fourth quarter because their special teams unit, failed them. And so I think
Right.
Urban recognized the value in that. I think Dan Mullen coming up under Urban obviously saw the value in that, and you can tell because he's adopted that same thought process. And so, it definitely helps having a Chris Rainey or a Brandon James back there returning punts. And you don't see those guys very often, I mean, Brandon James is a once-in-a 20-30-year talent. He was a special teams, a punt returner extraordinaire. You don't get a lot of those guys coming around every 3-4 years.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon James was a 5'6" highlight reel.
Yeah.
He was insane. If you don't know who Brandon James is, get on YouTube right now and check him out because he was electric.
And better yet, watch the blocking around him. There's the discipline associated with punt return unit, and that was why Urban Meyer wanted to take the direction of the punt return unit. He was the coach of the punt return unit for a reason. He knew that could turn a game on its head and it could suck the wind out of a stadium. So I think that, between block kicks and returns, it was probably one of the best coach units we had, and there were some studs that played on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Urban was known for kind of putting some of his best athletes on special teams because he put that big of an emphasis on it. So
if you go watch his punt and punt return units, those are his two units, punt especially. And I think that just comes with field position and what his philosophy was as a football coach, and knowing that field position could turn a game over. But yeah, man, you watch those films, I enjoy it.
yeah, me too. Sometimes I just get on YouTube and go down that rabbit hole and watch some old film.
And then you find yourself at 3 a.m. eating popcorn.
Yeah. All right. So the second part of Zane's question was, what is the biggest misconception among fans about major college football?
I'd say that I think that the biggest misconception is most athletes are waking up at 8:30, 9 a.m., grabbing breakfast, going to 2 classes, and then just going to practice at 2 and getting done at 6 and going home. Minus the workouts, I think a lot of even college students at times I don't think realize what goes on behind the scenes in at least the football team. I can't necessarily speak to other sports, but I know they work their tail off. But I think the biggest thing for us was, man, especially under a program like Urban and Dan Mullen, there's a lot expected out of you. There's a lot of time spent, whether it be in the classroom or in the tutoring hall, dining hall, nutrition. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes for you to get the most out of not only your education, but your athletic years. And so I think most people don't necessarily see, they may see the workout videos online. They'll see the practices and some of the stuff that's going on. But there's guys that are getting up at 5 o'clock and watching film, or there's guys that are getting up at 4:30 for a 5 a.m. workout and then watching film and going to class and going from class to lunch and going from lunch to watch film, meetings and practice, and then they get done. They got to go to dining hall again, nutrition. Got those guys, and then you got to go to tutoring. So a lot of times you're a 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. schedule. You go to bed, try and get your rest. You wake up and you do it all over again for 4, sometimes 5 years straight. I think the other misconception is some people just think summer comes and you get your raise and you go to the beach and you're hanging out for 3 months and then you come back and get ready for football season. But I was on campus all but 3 weeks out of the year. And that's, of course, me being an out-of-state guy. I never went anywhere outside of going home, just because that was the only place I took on vacations was going home to see family. And outside of that, man, you're a year-round student athlete. You're trying to get your credits. You're trying to make sure your grades are up. You're trying to make sure that kind of everything meshes well together. And I found as a student athlete, when I did better in the classroom, I did better on the football field. And I kind of wish I'd have learned that maybe 2 years earlier than I did.
Yeah, that's really good insight there, and thanks for sharing that, because I mean that's news to me too. I mean I kind of have that misperception also. It maybe not a misperception, but just that lack of understanding. So thanks for touching on that for us. All right, last one. Aaron Thomas wants to know, who's the best college football player that you've ever seen?
Played with or seen?
Either one.
Whew, that's tough when you played with a group of ballers.
Yeah.
Man, that's tough. I'll say it's really tough because I got a chance to see some pretty phenomenal athletes, phenomenal football players. I would have to, man, that's a tough one. I'd almost have to split that up, the offense and defense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I'll split it up offense and defense, best I've played with.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd say I don't want to discredit Percy either because, man, it's just so hard not to put him in that conversation.
Yeah.
I'd say just for what he was all around in terms of leader, worker off the field, person, football player, Tim Tebow's got to be that guy. From a defensive standpoint, I think the best I ever watched play the back end is Reggie Nelson, ever. And that's still, and to this day, still the best cover safety, best guy in the back end I've ever seen. For being 100 and, I don't even know what he was, 175 pounds, 180 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't a big dude.
And he hit you like he was about 260.
Yeah.
And he didn't mind throwing his head in there. I mean, he did whatever the heck he had to do. But, Percy, man, Dan Straney, God, I could throw 5 more guys on that list pretty quickly of guys that I played with.
Right.
If I had to say best that I've ever seen that I didn't play with, of guys that we played against, that'd be a tough one. I mean, we played against some really good talent in the East. I'll go with college football player best I've ever seen I didn't play with just in general. I'd say Ricky Williams was probably the best I ever saw.
Okay.
It'd either be him or Adrian Peterson would be really the two guys, or guys that weren't teammates, are probably the best I ever see from an athletic standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough question because I mean, there's been so many great players through the years, especially in college football. I mean, you have a lot of guys that are great in college and then get to the NFL and maybe not so great. So, there's a lot more to choose from at the college level. But
and there's guys that from a tight end standpoint, and guys that I grew up watching that really had an impact on me wanting to play college football. I could go that route, but they're not necessarily the best I've ever seen. I mean, how I watched Zach Miller and Jeremy Shockey's of the world, and those guys that kind of they really transcended that hybrid position. You know, the guys that were slot tight ends that could go hand down on the line, they could go in the backfield, that really opened up the position to being more than just a 260-pound body blocking a defensive end. There's plenty of guys that I could say were the best I've seen do it, but if we're talking sheer talent all around college athlete, I'd have to say that Ricky Williams or Adrian Peterson would be the two that I didn't play with.
Yeah, those are two good ones. And for me, it's really hard to kind of narrow, like, you know, say a guy like Tebow that played 4 years compared to, we'll say, Cam Newton that really only had one true season. It's kind of hard to narrow it down and say,
and
say like
funny.
maybe Cam might have been the best ever had he played 4 years. You never know.
Yeah, and you know, I think everybody's got their own journey and their own road. I think Cam, for sake of everything that he had going on and what he had to go through, who's to say that he would have been as good as he was without that adversity? So, you know, I think that adversity was good for him, and it really got him level-headed and worked his butt off to get back to where he was, and obviously we see where he's at now.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't wish that Cam Newton would have stayed at Florida, but, you know, everything that went down happened for a reason, and, you know, he did overcome adversity going JUCO and then going to Auburn, and, I mean, the rest is history, but props to him, and he, in my mind, he is one of the greatest ever.
He's still, to this day, one of my favorite teammates. For a guy to always have a smile on his face, especially, you know, during those two-a-days and when you come into camp and that kind of stuff, for someone to always have the smile on his face, the attitude he had, he was always in a goof mood and you know, joked around a lot, but it was one of those things that I always appreciated because it picked me up a little bit. So you never discredit those guys, because Cam was always a funny guy to be around and did nothing but treat me right. So
yeah, for sure. And I wasn't ever close to any of those guys or anything, but I kind of view Chris Rainey as the same way. I mean, I feel like every time the camera's on that guy, he's smiling. So
yep.
But Tate, man, that's going to wrap it up. But I appreciate you hopping on this episode with me.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me, like I said, and you guys take it easy, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to it.
All right.
All right, so a lot of good stuff there from Tate Casey. I really appreciate him coming on the podcast and sharing his personal experiences and giving his player perspective, and I thought that was really cool, and I hope you guys thought so too. I want to remind you all that you can find each Section 111 podcast episode on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and be sure to rate, review the show, let everyone know what they're getting with the Section 111 podcast, and that's how we're going to build this thing, is for you to give me feedback, and that's going to entice me to make this podcast as big as we can get it. So keep sharing, keep liking, keep doing what you're doing. I truly appreciate it. But as always, I hope you all learned something. I hope you gained some perspective, and most importantly, I hope you all were entertained. But thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Section 111 podcast.